that are all connected as one poem. There are 7 major poems. In fact, if I was going to entitle this lecture anything tonight, I would call it The 7 Poems in Ecclesiastes. The first one begins in verse 4. Actually, let's begin with verse 2 and 3. This is leading up. Verses 2 and 3 are kind of the motif for the whole book. Vanity of vanities, says the preacher. Vanity of vanities. All is vapor in the wind. What lasting profit does a man receive for all the labors that he performs under the sun? Now, that phrase, vanity of vanities, it actually sounds like meaninglessness or emptiness, but it actually comes from the Hebrew word for smoke being dissipated in the wind. A mist that rises up and might take a form. You ever laid on your back on the grass on a summer evening and looked at the clouds and, oh, look, that one looks like a dog, or this one looks like a teddy bear, or that one looks like Richard Nixon, or whatever. You've done it, haven't you? But they don't stay in those shapes. They are vapor in the wind. If you watch them a few more minutes, they'll change their shape. One might look like a house. In a few minutes, it'll look like 10 people standing there as the high winds move those clouds. Solomon is not saying that meanings aren't there, but they often shift. There's a lot of things that happen in our lives that shift. And in fact, as he begins this poem in verse 4, he's going to be talking about how meaning for human life comes and goes. Now, I want you to look at that first verse. One generation passes away as another generation comes, while the earth abides forever. Now, for the next 4 verses, he'll be talking about things on the earth. And then at the end of the poem, which is verse 11, he comes back to humanity again. So he'll be talking about things in the earth, things in nature that never change. They continue. But what changes is mankind. You see, humans are thinking creatures. We are ponderers, and we are creatures with personalities. You can't say that necessarily about blue jays, for instance. They have their generations too, but each generation is the same. Blue jays look the same. They all do the same work. They build nests. They lay eggs. They migrate. They come back. They're as reliable as the sun, rising every day and setting every evening. They are as reliable as the wind cycles Solomon will be talking about. They're as reliable as the water cycle. The same is true of bees, for instance. They labor, don't they, all the time. But they don't have personalities that distinguish them from one another. Humans have a unique type of personality. You are you, and there'll never be another you. You were born, you're going to die, and there'll never be another person exactly like you. And that's what Solomon will be saying in this. He'll be comparing the reliability of nature to the solitary life of a human being. Let's just read it then. He begins with verse 4. In fact, I'll just read through the whole thing, then we'll come back over it. One generation passes away as another generation comes, while the earth abides forever. Humans come and go, but things on earth, things in nature, they continue always the same. What do we mean? Well, verse 5, the sun arises eastward and then westwards, or westers downward. then hastens to the place where it arose. The sun never changes. It always keeps doing the same thing. I'll get back to that later. He comes to the wind cycles. The wind goes toward the south and turns around toward the north. These whirlings are continual, and they return again and again, following circuits. What about water? All rivers run into the sea, yet the sea never fills and says, "No more water, I'm full, you rivers can stop now." They continually falling into the sea never fills. To the place from whence the rivers come, there they return again. In fact, he says in verse 8, all of nature is filled with labor. A man may know its fullness, or no man may know its fullness. No eye may see all of it. No ear may hear it all. He's talking about the scientific study of nature. We still don't know so much about nature and all the species of insects and birds and reptiles on earth. No man can know it all, but it's there and it continues. And concerning nature, what has been is what will be. Bees make a honeycomb over here. Guess what the next generation of bees will occupy themselves with? Making honeycombs. In nature, things don't change generationally. For nature, there is nothing new under the sun. In fact, is there anything that may be called new? It already has been of old time, long before us. Now, people ask me about that scripture, and I want to come back to this and give a little comment on each of these. But notice that now he's through talking about nature, and he comes back to human generational living. We each live in one generation only. Nobody gets a second generation. Now, while I'm alive on earth, I might know my grandfather and my father, and then there's me. So there's 3 generations. But I'm not like any of them exactly. As one generation is dying off, my grandfather, a new generation is coming in, my son. And then, as my father gets old and is dying off, a new generation is coming in, my grandson. Largely, there are 3 or 4 generations on the earth, always a new one coming in and always an old one going out. But none of these people are going to do exactly the same things the way that birds and bees do, for instance, or reptiles or fish or any other species you want to look at in nature. Am I making sense to anyone? So he started off in verse 4 by talking about, for humans, one generation goes out while another generation comes in. And then he gets into all the reliability of nature. And now in verse 11, he's talking about humans. He says, as we have no remembrance of former things. So those who will come after us will not remember us. And those who will come after them will have no remembrance of them. Now, as we get into more comment, I want you to notice this beautiful poem that I call the Song of Cycles, beginning with the intransitory nature of humanity, or transitory. We come and we go. And then the reliable aspects of nature and the earth. And then he gets back to talk about the frustration of humanity in that regard. I hope I'm making sense to someone in this. Go back up to verse 4. This is humanity. One generation passes away, my grandpa, as a new generation comes, my own son. This comes and goes with people while the earth abides forever. Verse 5, when he talks about the sun, I don't know if the Copernican the theory was out there among people like Solomon in his days. You know what I mean by the Copernican theory? People thought that the sun goes around the earth and that the universe was earth-centered and everything rotated and revolved around the earth. Copernicus came along and said, oh, no, 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 no. Galileo had invented the telescope and begun to see things a little more clearly. The sun doesn't go around the earth. It is the earth. Here's the sun shining there, and it really doesn't move. Here's the earth, and the earth spins around. It turns on its own axis. So if you're standing somewhere on the earth, it looks like the sun is moving. Just as if you're on a merry-go-round and somebody's standing there watching as you, it looks like they're moving as you go by. But of course, they're stationary and you're the one that's moving. So when ancient people looked at the sun, this is a great mystery. There's the sun rising in the east. Well, it's actually being born because it's red. The whole sky is red. The sun's born in blood. And then it rises and leaves the redness behind and assumes a golden color. And then it rises more, a vermilion color. And then it rises higher. It's yellow now. And finally it's overhead, a great hero warming the earth, riding his flaming chariot across the sky. But now he begins to fall. Mid-afternoon, he's getting lower. And now, as he's about to touch the horizon, there's that red color again. And the sun descends, this great hero descends into the depth of night, also in blood color. Ancient man would look at that and develop his myths about it, but really couldn't answer this question. The sun goes all the way across the sky. 10 hours later, depending on the time of year, how long the night is, but there it is again. Is it the same sun? We saw yesterday's sun birth and die. So is this another sun coming up the next day? Or is it the same sun again? If it's the same sun, how did it get back under us to come up over there? They had no explanation for it, most cultures, so they developed myths about it. Solomon, however, sounds like he knows it's the same sun. The sun rises, the sun sets, and then hastens to its place from where it rose. Then, of course, the wind cycles, the trade winds, and so forth. Solomon's interested in ships. He's the only Israelite king to send out navies that sailed, and they learn about these winds in different parts of the ocean that are actually huge, swirling currents of air that move in the same sets, and they whirl about continually. Then the rivers running into the sea. Well, that's just a mystery. How can all the rivers run into the sea, and yet the sea never seems to fill up? And where are the rivers coming from? Oh, rivers come from the tops of mountains, don't they? Little tiny springs and rivulets and rills of water, and as they flow down the mountainside, they join together into creeks. As they get lower, those creeks join into broader streams. And then as the water moves out over flatter land, those broader streams flow into one river. And this river keeps coming. Is all that water percolating up out of the top of the mountain? Water doesn't go uphill. How can water percolate up out of the stones at the top of the mountain when it wants to move down? And these rivers go to the sea. How does all that water get up to the mountaintops to start with? Well, it used to be thought that there was a kind of water pressure pushing up through the rocks and coming out in the tops of the mountains, but that's not true. It's all from rainfall. Every bit of it is from rainfall, making grasses wet and trees wet, and finally the droplets fall and they hit and form little tiny, as I've already described, little tiny avenues that flow down and become bigger ones as they join together. Solomon just wonders, it never stops. It never changes. It's always in motion. And then he says all nature is filled with labor. And I've already said something about it, but he says no one can know all about it. I think Solomon is saying, look, if you're going to be a scientist, choose your area of study. You want to study dogs, stick with dogs. You won't learn all about them in your lifetime. You want to study eagles, learn all you can about them, but you'll never know everything about the eagle in one lifetime. And you shouldn't have the arrogance to stand back and say, I know all about all types of nature. No man can know it all. No eye can see it all. No ear may hear it all. And now comes this verse 9 that people debate about. When he says, at the end of verse 9, there is no new thing under the sun, what do you think he means? I've had people raise their hands and say, well, that's not true. There's always new things. There were no automobiles in Solomon's time, no hot air balloons flying in the sky. They didn't have the bicycle. They certainly didn't have the telephone. All these things were invented after Solomon and a million other things. How dare Solomon say that there could be nothing new invented? And when somebody brings that up to me, I say, oh no, Solomon was in praise of inventing things. He says so in the Proverbs. Let's bring forth witty inventions and new things. He wasn't talking about what man does. He's not talking about what people do. He's still looking at the earth and nature and says, what has been is what will be. What has been done is what will be done in nature. There is no new thing under the sun in nature. In fact, look around at nature. Is there anything that can be called new? You might explore the jungles and find a bird that no one in your country has ever seen and bring it back, and they'll say, oh, a new bird, but it's not a new bird. There are millions of them like that down in the jungle if you go look at them. They've been since the creation, and it always has been of old time, long before we found it or began to discuss it. But now he turns back to us, and I know I'm repeating myself, but I want you to get this point. It is bookended by two frustrations up in verse 4 and now down in verse 11. Two frustrations about humanity. You know, we have no remembrance of former things. What does that mean? Let me ask you a question. How many grandpas did you have? You had two grandfathers. How many great-grandfathers did you have? You had 4. Can you name your 4 great-grandfathers to me and tell me their biographies? You can just sum it up. Tell me about each of your 4 great-grandfathers. Tell me where he was born and what he did in life and what were his successes and failures and where he's buried. We can't even tell that about it. There's only 4 guys, our 4 grandfathers, but we have no remembrance of them. I know of a famous one. Let's see. I got 8 great-great-grandfathers. Is that right? Well, one of them was the governor of our state. The state I was born in, Louisiana, back during the Civil War. He was governor. I know his name. I know that he was governor, and I know he brought the state of Louisiana out of the American Union and into the Confederacy. And after the Civil War, all the Southern Confederate governors fled the country so that they wouldn't be arrested as war criminals. And he went to Cuba. I don't know anything more about him than that. But of my other 7 great-grandfathers, I don't know anything about them. I only know about the famous one because I've been told it over and over again all my life. And because my brother was named after him, and he never let me forget that while we were growing up. But I don't know them. You can go on these genealogical tree sites and learn. You know what they'll do? They'll search. There's a famous TV program about it where they'll bring in a celebrity. Let me tell you something about your ancestor. Well, you're just following one line of ancestors until you get to an important or interesting or famous one. There's all kinds of lines going back from you. All kinds of ancestors. And they never get to that stuff in any of them. That's what Solomon is talking about. He knew all about his father David. We can remember him, but not everything about him. And the day will come when he might be forgotten. Of course, David wasn't forgotten, but how many of you can tell me a whole lot about David's brothers and his father, Jesse? How many of you can tell me about David's grandfather, Jesse's father? You can't, can you? And that's what Solomon means. People lived and died and lived full lives, but they're not remembered. When it gets right down to it, we, concerning the generations of humanity, we have no remembrance of former things. I've got a friend, his name is John Tyler, and we were talking to some high school kids, he and I said, isn't that a great name he's got, John Tyler? And the kids just staring at me. I said, you know John Tyler, isn't that a great name? Why? said one of them, a 19-year-old. And I said, well, John Tyler was the President of the United States from Virginia. Haven't you ever heard of him? Nope. I said, how many American presidents can you name? Donald Trump. And I said, go back. Go back. Before Trump, before his first, who was president? Oh, yeah, that guy. Can't even remember his name. Obama, 2 terms. And who was president before him? I know this. And I said, just go as far back and name all the presidents. Well, George Washington, and after him was Abraham Lincoln. I said, no, almost 100 years later, 77 years later, actually, came Lincoln. But don't know any of them. Don't know Andrew Jackson. Don't know James Monroe. Don't know any of these men. John Adams. Heard of Thomas Jefferson, but I didn't know he was president, you know. And I'm not scolding those kids. I'm just saying we know so little about what was before us. And in our lifetime, we can't learn it all. If you devote yourself to be a historian, you still won't learn about all of it, even one nation's history. You'll have to focus on, I'm a United States historian. Oh, yeah, you know all about the United States. Well, no, I focus on the French and Indian War. Or I focus on the War of 1812. I've written 9 books about it. I still haven't finished learning all about that war. Nobody gets to know all about all who were before us, is Solomon's point. And guess what? No matter what we do, Solomon says, I just built a temple and a city. And God told me this temple would stand forever if those who come after me will obey him. And if they won't, it'll fall and be forgotten. Well, I'm known as the builder of the great temple, but I can tell you this. Those who will come after us will not remember us, will be forgotten one day. And let's not get too mad at them for forgetting us, because there'll be others come after them who will forget them. And he's taken us full circle in this Song of Cycles, right back to the first verse. One generation passes away and another one comes. All right, that's the end of the first poem. I'm not going to get to all 7 of them, am I? Because I talk too much. But let's go to chapter 3, verse 1. Here comes the second poem. And this one, I call it A Season for Every Work. For every work in life, there should be a season, a time for every purpose under the heavens. You might remember that famous old Pete Seeger song from the 1960s, Turn, Turn, Turn. Did you ever hear it? You might recognize it if I don't say Pete Seeger used to sing it, but if I say that There was a band called the Byrds that put it on the top 10, and it stayed there for a long time. And then the famous British singer Judy Collins made a big hit out of it 10 years later. To everything turn, turn, turn. There is a season, turn, turn, turn. And a time for every purpose under heaven. A time to be born, a time to die, a time to plant, and a time to reap, and on and on. You've heard it, haven't you? Some of those singers. Well, it's Ecclesiastes chapter 3. The great poem, A Season for Every Work. Now, I'm not going to spend much time on it because, within the past year, I think I did a Sunday morning sermon on this. But let me just point out the first line is, in the list, verse 2, as there is a time to be born, so there will be a time to die. Now, I've mentioned this before. The poem begins with your beginning and your death in one breath. A time to be born, a time to die. Now, all these other times that are listed, these series of a time to plant, a time to pluck up that which was planted, or harvest. All of these things come between your birth time and your death time. And if you'll follow it through and count these pairs of things, there's a time to laugh and there's a time to weep and so forth. You'll find that this poem attempts to describe the human experience in every detail of life. There's house building, wall building, clothes making, fashion changing, tear up the old clothes and turn them, they'll make good dish rags, and time to make some new clothes. Things wear out, and it gets down to the last. And there are times to love. There's also time to hate. If there come times for warfare, there must come a time of peace. You can't just keep fighting wars. You fight a war in order to win a peace, and so forth. But peace doesn't last, so there'll come again times for wars in different ways. All right, that's the second of 7 poems. Is this interesting to you in any way? What would you guess would be the third of 7 poems? I love this one. It's a short little poem. Chapter 4, verse 9. This poem is entitled, Why Two Are Better Than One. And I want you to think what he's really getting at here. It's only 4 verses long. 2 are better than one because each is reason for the other's labor. Now you see how it's in your Bible. This is my translation. Let me repeat it. 2 are better than one because each is a reason for the other's labor. Maybe he's talking about a marriage. Daddy goes out hunting and brings home the meat. Mama cooks it. 2 different kinds of work. Any 2 people you put together, whether they're co-workers, they're not going to do the same thing. If they're in a duality with each other, one man's work complements the other man's work. Okay, next to this, if one falls, the other will lift him up. But woe unto him who falls alone, for he has no one to help him. That can be true of physical falling if you break a leg. It can also be true of spiritual falling. If you fall down spiritually and you got nobody praying for you and helping you and loving you and understanding you to get you back up on your feet, you're not going to get back up. And if 2 lie together, then they have heat. But how can one be warm alone? Well, I sleep alone. I just turn on my electric blanket. That's not what he's talking about. He's talking about marriage here. A man and a woman were meant to comfort one another and bring the warmth, not only of body heat, but the warmth of love and family to each other. And then there's the threat, the last verse of this little poem. If an attacker comes, two can withstand him, and a threefold cord is not quickly broken. So you're not really two, man and wife. There's a third one with you. If you are man and wife in union with God, there's that threefold cord that nobody can break. Now, you know how rope is made. If any of you ever made rope, I had to teach a rudimentary class to some young people about how rope is made. And I made the rope making machine out of some blocks of wood and some old ugly sisal twine. And I showed them how to tie it to three little hooks here and the three little hooks there, but there's a thing they have to run through that brings them together and twist them. So the little strand is twisted, and the other one is twisted very tight, and the other one is twisted very tight, and then the three tightly twisted strands are brought together, and all three of them are twisted tighter against one another. Now you can get at the end of a piece of rope and start unfrazzling it, unraveling it. But what you're doing is untwisting things that were twisted together in such a way that they cannot come apart unless they are cut in the middle or worked against from both ends. Am I making sense to anyone? It is the tension that holds them together. A man and wife must have a tension between them, but they're also twisted together to hold one another. But you can't make rope out of two strands. There has to be the triple. The third strand has to be twisted against those two, or they will fray away from one another. And that's Solomon's point. It's a very poetic point. Even a rope has to have two, and then the third one, he implies, must be God, the one that holds the couple together. All right, enough on that. Read it, ponder it, make what you want of it. Let's see, the next poem. That's 3 poems. The next one, bear with me as I scroll. I hope I didn't skip over one. Let's see, I'm in chapter 7 now. Chapter 8, verse 5 begins the poem that I call Time and Judgment. It's also a short poem, verses 5, 6, 7, and 8 of chapter 8. He who obeys the commandment will feel no evil thing, and a wise man's heart discerns both time and judgment. Because to every purpose there is time and judgment. Although the misery of man is great upon him. For he does not know what will be, and no one can tell him when it will be. There is no man who has power over his spirit to retain it, neither has he power in the day of his death. There is no discharge in that war, neither shall wickedness deliver him who is given to it. So this little poem it begins with the good man. He who obeys the commandment will feel no evil thing. It ends with the wicked man who thinks that by all of his wicked deeds he can live longer and deliver himself from death. There's only blessing upon your life if you obey God. And a wise man's heart will discern that he's moving through time, and all of his deeds and all of his days, there's a judgment upon them. There is a decision being made about the man's character. Verse 7, he doesn't know what will be, and no one can tell him when it will be. Well, do each one of you know exactly what's going to happen to you tomorrow? You got plans for tomorrow, But the best made plans of mice or men do often go astray, don't they? Who said that? Shakespeare or somebody. But we really don't know what tomorrow brings. And whatever we think is coming, we don't know when it's going to come. None of us has power over our own spirit to keep it in our bodies. It's going to leave us one day in death. And we don't have power to retain our own life force in us. Neither do we, whether we're good or bad. Neither do we have any power concerning these things in the day of our death. That's the end of that little poem, Time and Judgment. I think, what's that, the fourth one? 3 more to go, ladies and gentlemen. I'll just talk them as quickly as I can, though I'd love to talk long times about all of these. I need to shut down. Here's a poem, chapter 10, verse 8. I love this little poem. Chapter 10, verse 8. I call this poem 5 Dangerous Professions. It goes down, verse 8 down through verse 11. Let me just list the 5 dangerous professions. First, the grave digger. Secondly, the hedge cutter. Thirdly, the stone quarrier. Fourthly, the woodsman, the tree hewer. And we won't meet the 5th one until the last line, the snake charmer. Now, ain't that a collection of 5 things? Let's go back to the top and read. The grave digger may fall into the pit he digs. Better be careful. The hedge cutter might get snake bitten. These are untamed snakes out there in the hedge. Wrapped around a limb, you stick your hand in, it might bite you. The stone quarrier may be crushed by the slab that he is splitting. You see that up there? Whoso removes stones shall be hurt therewith. That's not a dire prophecy, though the King James makes it sound that way. Solomon's saying this is a dangerous work, quarrying stone. You're up there on the edge of a big cliff of granite, and you drill holes, and then in the holes you begin to drive wedges. And slowly the split begins all the way down a line of granite, 10 feet or so. Now you've got to get it to split off because you need a big slab that's even all the way down. And you keep drilling and driving more wedges. And then you reach a point where you're able to pour hot coals down into the split and heat that rock up. And then pour water into it once it's red hot, and it'll split on off. It's quite a task, but it's a dangerous one. While you're trying to get all of that done, that split might open up and the whole thing fall over on you and turn you into not even a pancake, more like a crepe. So the stone quarrier. And then there's the lumberman, the tree hewer. He may be killed when the tree falls. In fact, that happened to a friend of mine in Maryland. Just a tree worker doing what your son does, Sheila, Dustin. And had a limb that he couldn't get untangled, and he went on down on his spiked, with his belt and everything, to get another tool to reach up, and the thing suddenly gave way, fell on top of his head, even though he was wearing a helmet, crushed his neck. He was quadriplegic and died within just a few years, bedridden the rest of his life. Out there in the woods, alone. The point is, Solomon makes it again. You never know what tomorrow's going to bring. You just never know. Now he puts in something more about this woodsman. In verse 10, the axeman, wearied with a blunted blade, pauses to sharpen its edge. Smartest thing he's done all day. Stop and make sure your axe is going to cut like you want it to cut. It'll do what you want it to do. In the same way, a man of wisdom pauses to consider his ways. Every axeman needs to stop and spend 5 minutes sharpening his axe every 30 minutes or so, or sooner, depending on the kind of wood you're cutting. In the same way, you want to be wise, don't rush into things. Fools rush in where angels fear to tread. If you want to be wise, do your work carefully and do it well, and stop to sharpen your tools as soon as you recognize that it needs doing. And then he goes to this weird profession. The muttering snake charmer may be bitten if the snake has no regard for his enchantments. Now, what Solomon's talking about right here is a phony, but people love them. Those snake charmers, and blow on their little flutes, and they take the lid off the basket, and that cobra's head rises up, and the snake charmer is going back and forth, and the cobra's going back and forth with him, but it doesn't strike. And it's all a big lie, because snakes have no ears. They can't even feel the vibrations necessarily of music in the air. They can feel the vibration of footprints on something solid, but not just airy sounds. The other thing is that cobra's probably been defanged, and they feed it very little, and it's always starved to death and sickly. And it just rises up because out of fear. And he just follows it. They can keep it going for a minute or two and then put the lid back on and then take collection for the magic that the guy has that's able to charm a deadly snake. Solomon is now laughing at something he's seen in the streets and in other places. And he's saying, even that guy, if he's not careful, might get the snake to bite him if he's not being very careful. So all of these are little things, dangerous professions. And we can compare them to a lot of things that we do. This is just a cross-section of professions. There's another short one. This is number 6. This is chapter 11, verse 1. And I'll just have time to read through this one. It goes down through verse 6. Chapter 11, verse 1 through 6. This is the 6th of 7 poems in Ecclesiastes. And I call this poem Uncertain Endeavors. Has this been interesting for you tonight? Because we're going to stop in just 5 minutes here. It begins with this. And he's talking, by the way, about his trade ships, his navies, probably talking to one of his captains. And he says, send out your trade grain upon the seas. Now, we don't read it that way, do we? Cast thy bread upon the waters, and you'll find it after many days. That doesn't even make sense. Just go take a loaf of bread and throw it on the water and see if it comes back to you as a dry loaf of bread a few days later. That whole, I hear guys using that in offerings. Come on, cast your bread upon the waters, it'll come back. It's not what Solomon's talking about. He's talking about his trade ships. Send out your trade grain upon the seas. But know that many days will pass before you may expect a return. He's sending out ships to sell grain with other countries. What can happen? Will he get a return of profit from this endeavor? Verse 2, apportion the cargo into 7 or 8 ships, for you do not know what catastrophe might befall them as they sail abroad. When the clouds become filled with rain, they empty themselves upon the earth. The storm winds might fell a tree, and it might fall to the north or the south, and it will remain as it has fallen. So you ship captains think you know everything? Don't put everything in one ship. One storm could sink the ship and you lose everything. Go out in 7 or 8 ships. 7 or 8. If only 3 of them survive a hurricane, you've got something to trade with. Sorry we lost the others. Columbus wouldn't dare, based on this proverb, he wouldn't dare sail across the Atlantic Ocean in one ship, as King Ferdinand advised him to do. He said, no, we need 3 ships. If one has problem, we can get in there and put things in another ship, and we'll have 2 left. So the famous Nina, Pinta, and Santa Maria, those 3 ships, 3 went there, only 2 made it back. Did you know that? So he's saying, divide things up. How do we apply this to our own lives? Don't put all your eggs in one basket. Could be an old saying we would use, but it's also about dealing with people. Don't put all your trust in one person. Have several people around you, each with different capacities, who appreciate you. Don't think you know what's going to come. Don't you captains, don't you think you're such a weatherman. Let me tell you, when the clouds come and there's a big storm, you don't know if the biggest wind is going to shift and blow north or south. And the tree you're standing under could fall either way when those winds are turbulent. So watch what you're doing. Look at verse 4. If you too much study the weather, you will never sow. You'll never do anything if you look too much to the weather. And if you regard the clouds, you'll never go out and harvest. Now let's talk a little more about farming. As you do not know the ways of the Spirit that formed your bones in your mother's womb, even so you cannot know the works of God who forms all things. Don't give me this boast that you know all about God. You've got all of God's rules and promises. In the morning, sow your seed. And in the evening, do not withhold your hand. There are some seeds that the Farmer's Almanac will tell you, sow them in the morning, and other seeds or grains or vegetables you'll plant, they do better if they're put in the ground in the evening. So whichever you choose, for you do not know which will prosper, this or that, or whether either will grow well or ill. You have no guarantees that you'll always reap what you sow. Any number of circumstances can prevent that from happening. Get out and do it, though. Don't sit around saying, I'm waiting for the perfect day. Don't plan it out too much. Do what you can. And then we come in the very next verse to the 7th and last poem, which is youth and old age. And it goes through almost to the end of chapter 12. It's a long poem. Youth and old age. And we'll get into that next week. Time's up for tonight. I hope you enjoyed my little review of the poetic writing style that's included in Ecclesiastes. Now, if you want to go home and do a special reading of Ecclesiastes, take a pencil with you. And if you read a line and you say, well, that's an observation, put a little O in the margin. If you read another line and say, well, that's a reflection, put a little R. And another one, well, that's an admonition. And then when you see groups like these 6 poems I've given you tonight, draw a little bracket all the way down. This is all one poem, isn't it? And put the letter P in the margin. So remember, in Ecclesiastes, you have what I call observations, then reflections, then admonitions, and then poems to ponder. That's all. Thank you very much for your attention tonight and for being here. Anything, Brother James?
We don't know anything that we was.